So there I was, sitting at this upscale restaurant, watching my wife transform into someone I barely recognized. She'd planned this whole evening with her friends and made it crystal clear from the moment we walked in that I was there for one reason, to pick up the tab. Not as her husband, not as someone worth including in the conversation, but as a walking credit card with legs. The evening started innocently enough. Her three friends were already seated when we arrived, and the fake smiles they gave me told me everything I needed to know. These women had never liked me, and tonight they weren't even trying to hide it. My wife slid into the booth next to them, leaving me sitting across like I was the outsider at my own dinner table. Within minutes, the joke started. Light at first, the kind that could pass as friendly banter if you squinted hard enough. But I've been around long enough to recognize passive aggression dressed up as humor. The first shot came from the blonde one, the ringleader of this little pack. Oh look, he actually showed up tonight. Usually you have to drag men kicking and screaming to girls' night, right? She laughed like she'd just delivered the punchline of the century. I smiled back, keeping my voice pleasant but letting the edge show through. Well, someone has to make sure you ladies don't get too wild and start a food fight. The staff here looks too classy to deal with that kind of chaos. The table went quiet for about 2 seconds before my wife forced out a laugh, but I could see the irritation flash across her friend's face. She wasn't expecting pushback, especially not the kind that turned her joke back on her. But instead of backing down, they doubled down. The redhead jumped in next, talking about how lucky my wife was to have someone so accommodating to her social life. The way she said accommodating made it sound like a character flaw. My wife just giggled along, nodding like this was the most insightful observation she'd ever heard. Accommodating is one word for it, I said, cutting into my steak with more force than necessary. Though I prefer selective about which battles are worth fighting. Some things are worth standing up for, others. I gestured around the table with my fork. Aren't quite there yet. The temperature dropped another few degrees. My wife shot me a look that was supposed to be a warning, but all I saw was someone more concerned about what her friends thought than how her husband was being treated. That told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in this marriage. The attacks got more personal after that. Comments about how I must be so grateful to have landed someone like my wife, how she was clearly the catch in our relationship, how I probably needed to step up my game to keep her interested. Each comment delivered with that sweet, poisonous smile that women perfect when they want a wound without appearing openly hostile. And through it all, my wife sat there laughing. Not uncomfortable laughter. Not the kind that says, "Please stop, you're embarrassing me." No, this was genuine amusement, like watching me get torn down piece by piece was the entertainment she'd ordered for dessert. I kept my responses sharp but controlled. When they questioned my career ambitions, I reminded them that success isn't always about showing off. Sometimes it's about actually having substance behind the flash. When they made jokes about my clothes, I mentioned how interesting it was that they noticed every detail about my appearance while their own husbands probably couldn't tell them what they were wearing yesterday. Every response I gave landed exactly where I intended it to, leaving them scrambling to regroup while trying to maintain their smug superiority. But instead of recognizing that maybe they'd picked the wrong target, they just got nastier. The worst part wasn't the attacks themselves. I've dealt with worse from actual enemies. The worst part was watching my wife's face light up every time her friends landed what they thought was a good hit. She was enjoying this. The woman I'd married, the one who used to defend me against anyone who even looked at me wrong, was now actively participating in my humiliation. By the time we ordered dessert, the gloves were completely off. They weren't even pretending to be subtle anymore. Direct comments about my masculinity, my ability to handle a strong woman like my wife, whether I was enough for someone with her social needs. The kind of attacks that cross every line of basic human decency, let alone respect between married couples. And my wife? She was practically glowing with the attention, soaking up every moment of being the center of this twisted show. She'd found her audience, and apparently I was just the opening act they had to endure before the real performance could begin. The dessert course was when they really showed their true colors. The brunette, who'd been relatively quiet up to this point, decided it was her turn to take a swing. She leaned forward with this predatory smile and said, "You know, I always wondered what it would be like to be married to someone so manageable. It must be nice having a husband who just goes along with whatever you want to do." Manageable. Like I was a house pet that had been properly trained. I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at her. Manageable is an interesting word choice. I prefer to think of it as choosing my battles wisely, though I'm starting to wonder if I've been too selective lately. The smile I gave her could have cut glass. Tell me, how's that working out in your own marriage? Because from what I hear, your husband's been pretty manageable himself lately, especially when it comes to those late nights at the office. Her face went white. Apparently, her friends hadn't filled her in on the rumors that had been circulating about her husband's new secretary. My wife kicked me under the table, but I was done playing nice. The blonde jumped back in, clearly trying to rescue her friend from the hole I'd just dug for her. Oh, someone's getting defensive. That's so cute when men try to act tough after being called out. Called out for what exactly? I asked, leaning back in my chair with the kind of calm that makes people nervous. For paying for dinner? For showing up when my wife asked me to? Or for not rolling over and playing dead while you three practice your amateur therapy session at my expense? The redhead laughed, but it sounded forced now. See, this is exactly what we're talking about. So sensitive. Your wife deserves someone who can handle a little teasing without getting all worked up. Teasing. I repeated the word like I was testing how it tasted. Is that what we're calling it? Because where I come from, teasing is affectionate. What you three have been doing feels more like a coordinated attack by people who've been planning this ambush for weeks. The table went dead silent. I'd hit the target, and we all knew it. This wasn't spontaneous girl talk that got out of hand. This was deliberate, orchestrated, and my wife had been in on it from the beginning. I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and saw someone I didn't recognize. The woman sitting next to me was practically vibrating with excitement at the drama she'd helped create. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed, like she was getting some kind of rush from watching me defend myself against her friends. "You're being ridiculous," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "They're just having fun. If you can't handle a little girl talk, maybe you should have stayed home." Girl talk. That's what she called systematically trying to tear down her husband's confidence in public. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. The blonde sensed weakness and went in for what she thought would be the killing blow. Exactly. This is why women need girls' nights. So we can be ourselves without having to worry about fragile male egos getting bruised by a little honesty. Honesty. I nodded slowly. I appreciate honesty. So let me return the favor. I looked directly at the blonde. Your last 3 relationships ended because you have this compulsive need to tear men down to build yourself up. It's not confidence. It's insecurity dressed up as empowerment. Then I turned to the redhead. And you've been living off alimony for 2 years while telling everyone you're finding yourself, which is just code for you can't function without someone else paying your bills. Finally, I looked at the brunette. And you've been so busy judging other people's marriages that you haven't noticed your own husband checking out emotionally. But sure, I'm the problem here. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 women who'd spent the entire evening dishing it out suddenly couldn't take it when it came back their way. But instead of backing down or showing even a hint of self-awareness, they doubled down on their attack. "See," the blonde said, her voice shaking with rage. "This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity we were talking about. Can't handle criticism, so he has to attack women personally." My wife nodded along like this made perfect sense. "You're being really unfair right now. They're my friends, and you're embarrassing me." Embarrassing her. I was embarrassing her by defending myself against her friend's coordinated assault on my character. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The redhead jumped back in, emboldened by my wife's support. This is why successful women have such a hard time in relationships. Men can't handle being with someone who has her own opinions and her own life. Successful women, I repeated, looking around the table. Is that what we're calling this? Because from where I'm sitting, I see 3 people who've made a hobby out of tearing others down, and 1 person who's so desperate for their approval that she's willing to throw her marriage under the bus for it. My wife's face went red. "That's not fair, and you know it." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair?" Fair would have been warning me that tonight was going to be an intervention about what's wrong with your husband. Fair would have been having this conversation in private instead of turning it into dinner theater for your friends. Fair would have been standing up for your husband instead of joining the pile-on. The whole restaurant was starting to stare now, but I was past caring about appearances. My wife had made it clear that her friend's opinions mattered more than her husband's dignity. and I was done pretending that was acceptable. My wife looked around the restaurant, suddenly aware that we'd become the evening's entertainment. Her cheeks were burning red, but not from shame about how I'd been treated. No, she was embarrassed that I'd fought back, that I'd disrupted her perfectly planned evening of public humiliation. "You need to calm down," she hissed, reaching across the table like she was going to grab my hand. "People are staring." I pulled my hand back before she could touch it. "People are staring because your friends have been treating your husband like a punching bag for the last hour, and you've been cheering them on." The blonde decided this was her moment to play peacemaker, probably realizing that things had gone too far even for her twisted sense of entertainment. "Look, maybe we all got a little carried away. Why don't we just order another round and start fresh?" Start fresh. I looked at her like she'd just suggested we pretend the last hour never happened. "You think you can spend an entire evening systematically attacking someone's character and then just reset the game when it gets uncomfortable?" My wife leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Please, can we just drop this? You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene." I nodded slowly, letting that sink in. "Not them, for turning our dinner into a roast session. Not you, for participating in it. Me, for having the audacity to defend myself." The redhead, apparently unable to read the room, decided to throw gasoline on the fire. "This is exactly what we were talking about. Some men just can't handle strong women having opinions." That did it. I stood up, and the sudden movement made everyone at nearby tables look over. I didn't care anymore. My wife's face went white as she realized this wasn't going according to her script. "Strong women," I said, my voice carrying across the restaurant. "Is that what this is? Because from where I stand, I see 3 bullies who get their kicks tearing down other people, and a wife who thinks it's acceptable to use her husband as entertainment for her friends." My wife shot to her feet, panic written all over her face. "Sit down. Please, just sit down and we can talk about this later." "Talk about what later?" I asked, genuinely curious about what she thought there was left to discuss. "About how you invited me here specifically to pay for their meal, while they spent the evening explaining everything that's wrong with me. About how you sat there laughing while they questioned my masculinity, my career, my worth as a human being." "That's not what happened," she said, but her voice cracked on the words. "No? Then what would you call it?" I looked around the table at her 3 friends, who were suddenly very interested in their dessert plates, because it sure felt like a coordinated attack to me. My wife's mask finally slipped completely. The fake concerned expression disappeared, replaced by cold irritation that I'd ruined her perfect evening. "If you can't tolerate my friend's jokes, then pay the bill and leave." The restaurant went dead quiet. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. She'd just said, out loud, in front of everyone, that my only purpose there was to pay for their entertainment. Not as her husband, not as someone deserving of basic respect, but as a wallet with legs who should either shut up or get out. I felt something click into place, a clarity so sharp it was almost physical. This wasn't about tonight. This was about what our entire marriage had become. I was the ATM, the reliable provider, the guy who showed up when needed and disappeared when inconvenient. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my wallet, but instead of opening it, I set it on the table and looked directly at my wife. "You know what? You're absolutely right." Her face brightened, thinking she'd won. "Good, so we can just..." I cut her off. "You can pay with that ring on your finger. For me, it's over." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the ice melting in water glasses 3 tables away. My wife's mouth fell open, her friends stared like I'd just announced I was from Mars, and I felt lighter than I had in years. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me." I picked up my wallet and put it back in my jacket. "You want someone to tolerate being disrespected for the privilege of paying your bills? Find someone else. I'm done." I turned to walk away, but her voice stopped me. "You can't be serious. You're throwing a tantrum over some harmless jokes." I turned back, and the look on my face made her take a step backward. "Harmless jokes? You just told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't handle being treated like garbage by your friends. In public, in front of a restaurant full of people, after sitting there for an hour watching them tear me down while you cheered them on." "I didn't mean it like that," she said, but we both knew she was lying. "You meant it exactly like that." I looked around the table one more time. "Enjoy your dinner, ladies. And enjoy figuring out how to pay for it." I walked toward the exit, and behind me I heard the blonde say, "He's bluffing. He'll be back." My wife's nervous laughter followed me out the door. She actually thought this was some kind of dramatic gesture that I'd walk back once I cooled off. She had no idea that she'd just handed me the clarity I'd been missing for months. 20 years of marriage, and she'd just reduced me to a payment method that should shut up or leave. Well, I chose leave. And unlike her friends' failed relationships, I wasn't coming back to negotiate terms. I walked to my car in complete silence, the cool night air hitting my face like a wake-up call. For the first time in months, maybe years, my head was completely clear. No second-guessing, no wondering if I'd overreacted, no guilt about walking away. Just pure, crystalline certainty that I'd made the right choice. The drive home started peacefully enough. I rolled the windows down, turned on some music, and actually found myself smiling. Not because I was happy about my marriage ending, but because I was finally free from the constant weight of being treated like I didn't matter in my own life. That peace lasted exactly 23 minutes. My phone started buzzing with text messages around the time I hit the highway. At first, just one or two, which I ignored. Then it became constant, a steady stream of notifications that I could hear, even over the music. By the time I was halfway home, it was buzzing so frequently it sounded like an angry hornet trapped in my cup holder. I pulled over at a gas station and checked my phone. 71 messages. 71. All from my wife. And they told the story of someone slowly realizing that their bluff had been called. The first few were angry. "This is ridiculous, and you're embarrassing yourself, and come back here right now." Classic power plays from someone who expected me to fold under pressure. Then came the bargaining phase. "Okay, fine. Maybe they went too far, and we can talk about this like adults, and just come back, and we'll work it out." But as the messages continued, I could watch her confidence crumble in real time. "Please don't do this," became, "I'm sorry, okay?" Which became, "They're saying you're serious." And finally, "Oh my God, you actually left me here." The missed calls started around message 30. First just one or two, then constant attempts to reach me. I let every single one go to voicemail. Whatever she had to say now, she'd had plenty of opportunities to say earlier when it might have mattered. Message 45 was where things got really interesting. The waiter brought the check. This isn't funny anymore. So she'd finally figured out that her human ATM had actually left the building. The reality of sitting there with a $300 dinner bill and no way to pay it had apparently cut through her delusions pretty quickly. Message 52. I had to call my sister to bring her credit card. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The irony was so thick I actually laughed out loud. She was worried about being humiliated now? After spending an entire evening orchestrating my public humiliation for her friends' entertainment? By message 60, the anger was back, but this time it had an edge of desperation. "You can't just abandon me like this, and what am I supposed to tell people?" And this is not how marriages work. Apparently, marriages worked by having one person pay for everything while tolerating any level of disrespect, but they didn't work when that same person decided they'd had enough. I got back in my car and continued driving home, letting the messages pile up. Then my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello." "Oh, so you do answer your phone." It was the blonde friend, and she sounded absolutely furious. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Excuse me. Your wife is sitting here crying her eyes out, and you just disappeared like some kind of coward." Real mature, running away from a conversation. I pulled over again, because this conversation was going to require my full attention. Running away from a conversation? Is that what you call what happened back there? Look, maybe we got a little carried away with the teasing, but that's no reason to throw a tantrum and abandon your wife. Teasing. I repeated the word slowly. You spent an hour systematically attacking my character, my masculinity, and my worth as a human being, with my wife's full participation and encouragement. Then she told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't handle it. But I'm the one throwing a tantrum. She didn't mean it like that, and you know it. No, I don't know it. What I know is that she meant it exactly like that. And now that there's consequences, suddenly everyone wants to pretend it was all just harmless fun. The blonde's voice got sharper. You're being ridiculous. She's your wife. You don't just walk away from your wife over some jokes. You're right, I said, and I could hear her start to relax, thinking she'd gotten through to me. I don't walk away over jokes. I walk away when my wife makes it clear that I'm nothing more than a wallet with legs whose only purpose is to pay for her entertainment while she and her friends use me as target practice. That's not. Here's what's going to happen. I cut her off. You're going to hang up this phone and never contact me again. My wife made her choice tonight when she chose your approval over her husband's dignity. Now she gets to live with that choice. You can't be serious. She's falling apart here. Then maybe you and your friends can comfort her. You got what you wanted, right? You proved that she values your opinions more than her marriage. Congratulations. I hung up and immediately blocked the number. Then I blocked my wife's number too. If she wanted to communicate, she could do it through lawyers. But apparently, blocking her number just made her more creative. 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. Different number this time. I answered it, expecting another friend. Please don't hang up. It was my wife, calling from someone else's phone. I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this. We had 20 years to talk about this. Tonight you made it clear there's nothing left to discuss. That's not true. I love you. This is just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car, staring at the house we'd shared for 2 decades. You told me to pay the bill and leave. In front of a restaurant full of people. After sitting quietly while your friends spend an hour explaining everything that's wrong with me. What part of that did I misunderstand? The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, I was just frustrated. You were being so confrontational with my friends. Confrontational. For defending myself against their attacks. They weren't attacks. They were just being themselves. And there it was. The real truth. Her friends being themselves meant attacking me, and me being myself meant taking it quietly. That was the dynamic she'd expected, and when I refused to play along, I became the problem. You're right, I said. They were being themselves. And so was I when I walked out. The difference is, I'm not asking anyone else to change who they are to make me comfortable. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, I'd start making the calls I needed to make. Tonight, I just wanted to enjoy the silence. I made it exactly 10 minutes inside my house before my phone started ringing again. Different number. I turned it back on to check some work emails, thinking maybe I'd have a few hours of peace. Apparently, my wife had moved on to using her other friends' phones. I was tempted to ignore it, but then I recognized the number. It was the redhead, the one who'd made the comment about successful women earlier. Something told me this conversation was going to be interesting. What? I answered without any pretense of politeness. Wow, real classy. No wonder she's having second thoughts about this marriage. Second thoughts. I almost laughed. She told me to pay the bill and leave. Those weren't second thoughts. That was a decision. Look, tough guy, your little temper tantrum has gone on long enough. She's here crying her eyes out. And frankly, it's pathetic. Just come back, pay the damn bill, and take your wife home like a man. The sheer audacity of this woman was breathtaking. After spending the evening watching her participate in tearing me down, she was now lecturing me about being a man. Like a man, I repeated. Tell me, what exactly does that mean to you? Does it mean sitting quietly while my wife's friends explain everything that's wrong with me? Does it mean paying for the privilege of being disrespected? Or does it mean knowing when I've had enough and walking away with my dignity intact? It means not abandoning your wife over some harmless girl talk. There was that phrase again. Harmless girl talk. Like there was some magical protection that made verbal abuse acceptable as long as it came from women who called it bonding. Here's what I find fascinating, I said, settling into my favorite chair. You spent the entire evening trying to tear me down, questioning my masculinity, my worth, everything about me. But now that I've responded exactly like the strong, decisive man you claimed I wasn't, suddenly I'm the problem. That's not what happened. No? Then explain to me what happened. Because from where I was sitting, it looked like 3 women who decided to use their friend's husband as entertainment, with her full participation and encouragement. We were just having fun. If you can't handle a little teasing, stop. My voice cut through her excuse like a blade. Stop calling it teasing. You know what teasing is. Teasing is affectionate. Teasing is when people who care about you give you a hard time about something harmless. What you did was systematic, coordinated, and designed to humiliate. You're being way too sensitive about this. Am I? Let me ask you something. How would you feel if your husband invited his buddies over for dinner, and they spent the entire evening explaining everything that was wrong with you? Your looks, your intelligence, your value as a partner, your ability to satisfy a man. And through it all, your husband just sat there laughing along, adding his own comments occasionally. The line went quiet. And then, I continued. When you finally got fed up and said something, your husband told you to pay for everyone's dinner and leave if you couldn't handle the jokes. How would that make you feel? That's different. How? How is that different? Because men are supposed to be stronger about these things. Stronger. I let that word hang in the air. So it's my job to be strong enough to tolerate any level of disrespect, but it's not your job to be decent enough not to dish it out in the first place. Look, maybe we went a little too far, but that's no reason to blow up your entire marriage. I didn't blow up my marriage. Your friend did, when she made it clear that I'm nothing more than a payment method that should shut up or leave. I chose leave. She was just frustrated. You were being confrontational with her friends. Her friends, I said slowly, were being confrontational with me. I was responding. There's a difference between starting a fight and finishing one. You're twisting everything around. No, I'm seeing it clearly for the first time in years. You want to know what really happened tonight? Tonight, I realized that my wife values your approval more than her husband's dignity. She'd rather throw me under the bus than risk disappointing you three. That's not true, isn't it? When push came to shove, when she had to choose between standing up for her husband or keeping her friends happy, what did she choose? Silence. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice dropping to that calm, cold tone that makes people pay attention. You're going to stop calling me. You're going to stop involving yourself in my marriage. And you're going to take a long, hard look at what kind of friend you actually are. You can't just walk away from 20 years of marriage over one bad night. Watch me. And here's the beautiful part. It wasn't one bad night. It was 20 years of training me to accept less and less respect until tonight, when she finally said the quiet part out loud. I'm just the guy who pays the bills. She didn't mean it like that. She meant it exactly like that. And you know what? I'm grateful she was finally honest about it. It saves us both a lot of time. The redhead's voice got smaller, less confident. What am I supposed to tell her? Tell her that actions have consequences. Tell her that respect isn't optional in a marriage. Tell her that she chose her audience tonight, and now she gets to live with that choice. She's devastated. She really didn't think you'd actually leave. Of course she didn't. Because I've spent 20 years teaching her that she could treat me however she wanted, and I'd still be there. Well, class is over. I hung up and immediately blocked that number 2. Then I sat back in my chair and looked around the house we'd built together. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The man who knew his worth and wouldn't accept anything less. The man I'd forgotten I used to be. I didn't waste time feeling sorry for myself or second-guessing my decision. By 11 that night, I was already making the calls that would protect my future. My lawyer's emergency line got me through to his voicemail, and I left a message that made it clear this wasn't something that could wait until Monday. It's done. 20 years, over as of tonight. I need an emergency consultation first thing tomorrow morning. I'll explain everything then, but prepare for a contested divorce with significant assets involved. Next, I called my accountant. Same drill, same urgency. When you've built a life with someone for 2 decades, you don't just walk away. You strategically withdraw while protecting everything you've worked for. While I waited for callbacks, I started documenting everything. Not just tonight's events, but patterns I'd been too comfortable to notice before. The gradual erosion of respect, the increasing frequency of situations where I was expected to provide while being treated like an inconvenience. My phone kept buzzing with messages from numbers I didn't recognize. She was clearly working through every contact in her phone, trying to find someone whose number I hadn't blocked yet. Each attempt just reinforced that she still didn't understand what had happened. This wasn't about anger that would fade with time. This was about fundamental incompatibility that had finally been exposed. Around midnight, my lawyer called back. He'd gotten my message and wanted to understand the urgency. 20 years of marriage don't end overnight without cause, he said. What happened? I gave him the abbreviated version. Public humiliation, systematic disrespect, the final ultimatum about paying the bill and leaving. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. And this was in front of witnesses? Other diners, restaurant staff. The whole place heard the final exchange. She told me to pay the bill and leave if I couldn't tolerate her friend's jokes. I told her she could pay with her wedding ring because it was over. Good. Public witnesses to her statements will be valuable. Don't delete any of those text messages she's been sending. They'll show her state of mind and potentially reveal more about her true feelings. We scheduled an early morning meeting. He'd prepare preliminary paperwork and we'd discuss strategy. The goal wasn't to be vengeful, it was to be smart. After hanging up, I poured myself a drink and sat in my home office, looking at financial documents. 20 years of building something together, and it had come down to her seeing me as nothing more than a funding source for her social life. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I recognized, her sister. I don't know what happened tonight, but she's at my house crying. Whatever this is about, don't you think you're overreacting? I stared at that message for a long time. Her sister had always been reasonable, someone who stayed out of marital disputes and treated both of us fairly. If she was reaching out, my wife must be painting quite the picture of wounded innocence. I typed back. Ask her to tell you exactly what she said to me at the restaurant. Word for word. Then ask yourself if you'd accept your husband saying that to you in public. The response came back quickly. She said you were being difficult with her friends, and she got frustrated. That's not what she said. What she said was, if you can't tolerate my friends' jokes, pay the bill and leave. In front of a crowded restaurant. After sitting quietly while they spent an hour attacking my character. Long pause. Then, she said that. Word for word. After 20 years of marriage, she reduced me to a wallet that should shut up or get out. Another long pause. I had no idea. She made it sound like you just exploded over nothing. I did explode, but not over nothing. Over everything. Over years of being taken for granted until tonight, when she finally said what she really thought of me. What happens now? Now she finds out what life looks like without the man she told to leave. I didn't wait for a response. The conversation was over, just like everything else. By 2 in the morning, I'd received messages from 12 different numbers. Friends, family members, even some people I barely knew. She was clearly working every angle, trying to find someone who could talk sense into me. But here's what she didn't understand. This wasn't an emotional decision that could be talked away. This was a business decision. She'd breached the fundamental contract of our marriage, mutual respect, and done it publicly, definitively, and without any regard for the consequences. The last message came at 2:47 a.m. from what I assumed was yet another borrowed phone. Please. I know I messed up. Can we just talk about this like adults? I stared at that message for 5 minutes, thinking about 20 years of memories. The good times, the shared dreams, the life we'd built together. Then I thought about her face when her friends were tearing me down. The way she'd lit up with attention, the way she'd participated in my humiliation, the casual cruelty in her voice when she told me to pay and leave. I deleted the message without responding. At 3 a.m., I finally went to bed in the guest room. Not because I was being dramatic, but because the master bedroom felt like it belonged to people who no longer existed. The couple who'd shared that room was gone. Ended the moment she chose her audience over her husband. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, paperwork, and the complicated process of untangling 2 decades of shared life. But tonight, I slept better than I had in months. Because for the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged, in a place where I was respected, valued, and treated with the dignity every person deserves. Even if that place was just a guest room in my own house. The man who'd walked out of that restaurant wasn't coming back. The man who'd accepted 20 years of diminishing returns was gone forever. What remained was someone who knew his worth and wouldn't settle for anything less. And that man was going to be just fine.